The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and memory, a warm cradle of scents that had held me through countless mornings. I stood at the counter in my West Asheville bungalow, arranging a bouquet of daisies in a chipped ceramic vase, one I'd saved for special days. The flowers caught the May sunlight streaming through the window, their petals soft as a promise I'd clung to for years. Today was Mother's Day, and Margaret Thompson. Maggie, to those who knew me best, was preparing a gift for my daughter-in-law. Lauren, a silk scarf, deep blue with a pattern of tiny stars, lay folded in tissue paper beside the vase. I'd spent weeks saving for it, pinching pennies from my pension, because I wanted Lauren to feel cherished. At 62, I still believed a thoughtful gift could mend a frayed bond. My hands, lined with years of work, moved carefully as I tied a ribbon around the gift box. I'd raised my son, Dan, alone after my husband, Tom, died of a heart attack 30 years ago. 2 jobs filing papers at an insurance office by day, waiting tables at a diner by night had kept a roof over our heads. I'd given up dreams of painting, of art school, to make sure Dan had a chance at college, at a life better than mine. And when he married Lauren, I'd hoped she'd be the daughter I never had. But hope, I'd learned, could be a fragile thing. The scarf wasn't just a gift, it was a gesture, a quiet plea for connection. Lauren had always been distant, her smiles polite but sharp-edged, her invitations to family gatherings rare and often forgotten. I'd told myself she was busy, raising Emma and Noah, managing her marketing job, keeping up with the demands of their life in Biltmore Forest, the kind of neighborhood where lawns were manicured and houses whispered wealth. I'd helped them buy that house, dipping into my retirement savings for a $50 to $1,000 down payment, and later sending $1,200 a month for the mortgage when Dan lost his tech job. It was a stretch, more than I could afford, but family stuck together. That's what I'd always believed. I glanced at the clock, 10:38 a.m. Dan had promised to call about tomorrow's Mother's Day lunch. I'd already baked a batch of oatmeal cookies, the ones Emma loved, and planned to bring a lemon pie, Noah's favorite. The phone buzzed, and my heart lifted. Dan's name lit up the screen. I wiped my hands on my apron, the one with faded daisies Tom had bought me years ago, and answered, "Mom." Dan's voice was tight, like a string pulled too taut. "About tomorrow." I gripped the edge of the counter, the wood cool under my fingers. "What about it?" "Honey, I've got Lauren's gift ready, and the kids' cookies are cooling on the rack." A heavy pause stretched between us, the kind that carried bad news. "That's just it, Mom. Lauren thought it'd be better to keep it small this year, just us and the kids." The kitchen seemed to tilt. "But I'm family." "Dan," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "You know what I mean," he said, his tone dropping low, almost pleading. "Just us, and Lauren's parents are coming, too." The daisies blurred before my eyes. "Her parents..." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're staying the weekend." "Yeah," he said, and I could hear him shift, uncomfortable. "Look, Lauren's been stressed with the house renovations and all. It's just easier this way." Renovations. The word stung. I'd been paying for their mortgage, month after month, while they added a new deck, repainted the living room, installed granite countertops. My retirement fund dwindled with every check. But I'd never complained. I could drop by for a bit. I offered, hating the desperation in my voice, just to give Lauren her gift. "I won't stay long." "Mom, please," Dan said, frustration creeping in. "Don't make this difficult." The words cut deeper than I expected, like a knife slipping through soft butter. I closed my eyes, picturing Dan's face, the way he used to run to me as a boy, his laughter filling this very kitchen. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Tell the kids I love them. After we hung up, I stood there, the phone still warm in my hand. The sunlight felt mocking now, too bright for the ache settling in my chest. I looked at the scarf, its stars glinting like a sky I couldn't reach. For years, I'd made excuses for Lauren's coldness. She was young, I told myself, from a different generation. She needed time to warm up to me. I'd swallowed her snide remarks at Thanksgiving dinners, pretended not to notice when she left me out to family photos, smiled through the hurt when she forgot to invite me to Emma's school play. All the while, I'd kept writing those checks, believing they'd hold us together. I picked up my keys. I'd drive to their house, leave the gift on the porch, and go. No fuss, no scene, just a small act of love, because that's what mothers do. The scarf felt heavy in my hands as I slipped it into a gift bag, the tissue paper crinkling like a whisper of doubt. I drove through Asheville, past the quirky shops of West Asheville, the coffee houses where artists gathered, and into the polished streets of Biltmore Forest. The houses here were grand, with wide porches and windows that gleamed like they'd never known a speck of dust. Dan's Colonial stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, its lawn a perfect green. I parked across the street, the gift bag in my lap. The house was quiet, no cars in the driveway. Maybe they were out shopping for tomorrow. I stepped out, the spring air soft against my skin, and walked toward the porch. As I reached the steps, a voice drifted through an open window, sharp and unmistakable. Lauren. No. Mom. Don't worry about her showing up, she said, her tone laced with ice. I made sure Dan told her to stay away. I froze. The gift bag clutched to my chest. My feet felt rooted to the concrete, as if the earth itself held me there. I should have turned back, should have left, but I couldn't move. She's not invited this year, Lauren went on, her laugh cold as a winter wind. Or any year, if I have my way. A pause, then her voice dropped, dripping with contempt. You know what'd be the real Mother's Day gift when that nosy old woman finally ends up in a nursing home? That'd be worth celebrating. The bag slipped from my fingers, hitting the porch with a soft thud. The scarf spilled out, its stars dull against the grey concrete. My breath caught, a jagged thing in my throat. Nosy old woman. Nursing home. The words echoed, each one a stone sinking into my heart. I bent to pick up the scarf, my hands trembling, and a tear fell, darkening the silk. I barely noticed the sting of a small cut on my finger, a nick from the porch's rough edge. I drove home in a daze, the streets of Asheville blurring through my tears. Back in my kitchen, I collapsed onto a chair, the daisies still bright in their vase, mocking me with their cheer. For years, I'd been Lauren's doormat, excusing her barbs, her exclusions, her way of making me feel small. I'd told myself it was stress, that she'd come around. I'd given everything, my savings, my time, my heart to keep Dan's family afloat. And this was my reward, a wish for my exile, a celebration of my absence. My gaze fell on the checkbook, sitting on the counter beside a stack of unpaid bills. The mortgage payment for their house was due Monday. $1,200, nearly half my monthly income. I'd written the check last week, ready to mail it as always. I picked it up, the paper crisp between my fingers, and stared at the amount. Every month. I'd sent it without question, even when it meant skipping my own groceries, cancelling my newspaper subscription, letting my garden tools rust because I couldn't afford new ones. Something shifted inside me, like a door creaking open after years of being locked. I held the check over the sink and tore it in half. Then again, the pieces fluttering like broken promises. I grabbed the phone and dialed the bank, my voice steadier than I felt. Mrs. Thompson. The teller's voice was polite, surprised. You're cancelling the recurring payment to the mortgage company. You've been making it for over a year. I'm sure, I said, my heart pounding but resolute. That payment stops today. When I hung up, the kitchen was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. My hands, which had trembled earlier, were still. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Tomorrow was Mother's Day, and I'd spend it alone. But it would also be the first day of something new. Something I hadn't dared imagine a life where I mattered, not for what I gave, but for who I was. I walked to the window, looking out at my garden. The daisies swayed in the breeze, their faces turned toward the sun. I thought of 1985 when Dan was 10, and we'd planted our first garden together. He'd been so proud of those flowers, his small hands patting the soil. Back then, I'd believed love could fix anything: poverty, grief, loneliness. I'd poured that love into Dan, into his family, hoping it would hold us together. But love, I was learning, needed respect to bloom. The phone buzzed again, Dan's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring, watching the daisies dance outside. Too soon for him to know about the check. But maybe Lauren had seen me on the porch. I didn't care, for now. I needed this moment, this small act of defiance, to remind myself I was still here. I sat at the kitchen table, the gift bag crumpled beside me. The scarf was ruined, stained with dirt and my tears. But the daisies in the vase stood tall, their petals catching the last of the sunlight. They seemed to whisper that spring wasn't over. Not yet. Not for them. And maybe not for me. If this story touches your heart, follow my journey to see how I found my way back to myself. Subscribe to my channel and comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far my story travels, the morning after Mother's Day. I woke to a quiet house, the kind of stillness that settles when something has broken. My kitchen, usually a haven of warmth, felt hollow. The daisies I'd arranged yesterday stood in their vase, but their brightness seemed muted, like a song played too softly. I hadn't slept much, my mind tangled with Lauren's words, nosy old woman, nursing home, and the torn pieces of that $1,200 check still lay in the trash can. A small rebellion I both cherished and feared. At 62, Maggie Thompson, was no stranger to hard days, but this one carried a weight I couldn't shake. I made coffee. The old Folgers kind I'd been drinking since the 70s, and sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug. The table was scarred, from years of used Dan's crayons when he was 5, Tom's coffee rings from late-night talks. Each mark told a story, a piece of the life I'd built. As the coffee's warmth seeped into my palms, I let my mind drift back, to the years that had shaped me, to the sacrifices that had led me here, to this moment of reckoning. It was 1978, and Asheville was a different place then, a sleepy mountain town where the air smelled of pine and possibility. Tom and I were newlyweds, living in a cramped apartment off Hayward Street, the kind with creaky floors and a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was 25, with dreams as big as the sky. I'd been good at painting back in high school, good enough that my art teacher, Miss Clara, had pushed me to apply to art school. "You've got a gift, Maggie," she'd said, her eyes bright with belief. But art school cost money, and my parents, hard-working folks who ran a small grocery, couldn't afford it. So I enrolled at UNC Asheville, studying business administration because it was practical, steady, safe. Tom was my anchor, a carpenter with hands that could build anything, and a laugh that made my heart lift. We'd spend evenings on our tiny balcony, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, talking about the future. I'd sketch him sometimes, his profile soft in the twilight, and he'd tease me, saying, "One day, Maggie, you'll have a gallery full of these." I believed him, Or at least I wanted to. But life had other plans. By 1982, Dan was born, a squalling bundle of joy who filled our days with love and our nights with worry. Money was tight, and when Tom's carpentry work slowed, I took a job as a receptionist at an insurance office. I'd bring my sketchbook to work, doodling in the margins during lunch breaks, but the paint stayed packed away. Motherhood, I learned, was a canvas of its own, one that demanded every color I had. Then, in 1992, the world cracked open. Tom collapsed at a job site, a heart attack that stole him before the ambulance could reach the hospital. Dan was 12, all gangly limbs and quiet grief. I was 39, a widow with a mortgage, a grieving son, and a heart that felt like it might never beat right again. Tom's life insurance barely covered the funeral. $25,000 that vanished in a blur of bills and caskets. I sold our little house near downtown Asheville and bought this bungalow in West Asheville. A fixer-upper with a garden I promised myself I'd tend someday, to keep us afloat. I worked 2 jobs, days at the insurance office, nights waiting tables at a diner off Patton Avenue. I'd come home at midnight, my feet aching, and find Dan asleep on the couch, his math homework scattered beside him. I'd help him finish it before dawn, then catch a few hours of sleep before the cycle started again. Art, dreams, even simple pleasures like a Sunday drive, they all faded, replaced by the rhythm of survival. I don't regret it, not really. Dan was my world, and every late shift, every skipped meal, was for him. I wanted him to have what I hadn't, a college education, a chance to build a life without the weight of worry. When he got into NC State in 2001, I took out a second mortgage on the bungalow to cover tuition. I'd sit at this very table, balancing the checkbook, praying the numbers would add up. They rarely did, but Dan graduated with a degree in computer science, and that felt like a victory worth any price. The coffee had gone cold in my mug. I traced a scratch on the table, remembering the pride in Dan's eyes when he landed his first tech job in Raleigh. He'd called me, his voice bright with excitement. "Mom, I'm going to make you proud," he'd said, and he had. But pride, I was learning, couldn't fill the gaps in a family. I stood and walked to the living room, where a photo of Dan and me hung on the wall. It was taken at his college graduation, both of us beaming, my arm around his shoulders. That was the year he met Lauren. 2005 at a friend's barbecue. I'd been thrilled to meet her, this confident young woman with a marketing degree and a smile that lit up the room. She was ambitious, polished, everything I hadn't been at her age. I'd hoped we'd be close, that she'd share stories over coffee, that we'd laugh together at Emma and Noah's antics. I'd even brought her a homemade quilt as a welcome to the family gift, each square stitched with care. But Lauren's smile had faltered when I gave it to her. "Oh, Maggie, this is sweet," she'd said, folding it away in a closet. I'd brushed it off, told myself she was just modern, not one for homemade things. Over the years, I tried to build a bridge baking cookies for their engagement party, offering to babysit Emma when Lauren returned to work, sending cards for every holiday. But each gesture seemed to widen the gap. Lauren's responses were clipped, her invitations rare. "We're fine, Maggie," she'd say when I offered help. "You don't need to worry." I worried anyway. When Dan lost his job in 2022, a casualty of tech industry layoffs, he came to me, his eyes downcast. "Mom, the bank won't approve us for the full mortgage on the Biltmore Forest house," he'd admitted. "It's perfect for the kids, in the best school district." I didn't hesitate. I gave them $50 to $1,000 from my retirement savings for the down payment, nearly all I had left. When the mortgage payments became too much, I started sending $1,200 a month, even though it meant cutting back on my own life. Lauren never said thank you, but I told myself it was for Dan, for Emma and Noah, for family. Back in the kitchen, I opened a drawer and pulled out an old sketchbook. Its pages yellowed with age. I hadn't drawn in decades, but flipping through it now, I saw traces of the girl I'd been sketches of mountains, of Tom's hands, of Dan as a baby. Each line was a memory, a piece of a life I'd set aside. I closed the book, my chest tight. I'd given so much, but what had I kept for myself? Lauren's words echoed again, sharp as a blade nursing home. Was that all I was to her? A burden to be endured until I could be packed away. I thought of Dan, my boy, who'd once made me daisy crowns in this garden. He wasn't cruel, not like Lauren, but he'd let her words slide, let her push me out of their lives. I remembered a moment last Christmas, when Lauren had forgotten to tell me dinner was moved up 2 hours. I'd arrived at their house to find everyone finishing dessert, the table cluttered with empty plates. "Oh, Maggie, we didn't think you were coming," Lauren had said, her smile too bright. Dan had looked away, saying nothing. I'd laughed it off, but it hurt, a quiet wound that never quite healed. The phone rang, pulling me back to the present. Dan's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button. What could he say now? That Lauren was sorry, that it was all a misunderstanding. I let it go to voicemail. The silence of the house wrapping around me like a quilt. I needed time to think, to untangle the love I felt for my son from the pain of his silence. I walked outside to the garden, the grass cool under my bare feet. The daisies stood tall, their faces open to the sky. I knelt beside them, touching a petal, soft as a child's cheek. In 1985, Dan and I had planted these flowers, his small hands digging in the dirt. "They're for you, Mom," he'd said, his grin wide with pride. Back then, I'd believed family was forever, that love could weather any storm. Now, I wasn't so sure, but as I looked at the daisies, something stirred in me, a whisper of strength. I'd survived Tom's death, years of scraping by, the loneliness of raising a child alone. I'd built a life from ashes once. Maybe I could do it again. Not for Dan, not for Lauren, but for me. I returned to the kitchen and picked up the sketchbook again. My fingers traced a drawing of the mountains, the lines bold and sure. I didn't know if I could paint again, if I could find that girl who'd dreamed in color, but I wanted to try. For the first time in years, I wanted something for myself. The voicemail light blinked on my phone. I ignored it, setting the sketchbook on the table. Tomorrow, I'd face Dan's call, Lauren's excuses, the fallout of the check I'd torn. But today, I'd sit with my daisies, my memories, and the small, stubborn hope that I was more than the sum of my sacrifices. The days after Mother's Day passed in a haze, each one quieter than the last. My bungalow in West Asheville, once a sanctuary of small comforts, felt like a house holding its breath. The daisies in the kitchen vase had begun to droop, their petals curling like pages in an old book. I hadn't replaced them, hadn't had the heart to. At 62, Maggie Thompson, was used to stitching myself back together after hard times. But Lauren's words, nosy old woman, nursing home, clung to me like damp air after a storm. They weren't just words, they were a mirror, showing me how little I mattered to the family I'd poured my life into. I moved through my routine, mechanically brewing Folgers coffee, tending the garden, flipping through the newspaper I could barely afford. But the silence was deafening. Dan hadn't called since that voicemail I'd ignored, and Lauren, predictably, hadn't reached out. I'd expected anger, maybe a confrontation about the cancelled mortgage payment, but this stillness was worse. It was as if I'd vanished, not just from their Mother's Day table, but from their lives entirely. One morning, I found myself at the mailbox, sifting through bills and junk flyers. Tucked among them was an envelope. My handwriting staring back at me, a birthday card I'd sent to Emma, my 11-year-old granddaughter, 2 months ago. The words "wrong address" were scrawled across it in Sharpie, though my address hadn't changed in 20 years. I opened it, my fingers trembling. Inside was a note I'd written, "Happy birthday. My sweet Emma. Grandma loves you always. Can't wait to bake those cookies with you." A $20 bill was still tucked inside, untouched. I stood there, the spring breeze cool against my face, and felt a fresh wound open. Lauren hadn't just kept me from her table, she'd kept me from my grandchildren, too. Back inside. I set the card on the kitchen table, next to the old sketchbook I'd pulled out last week. I hadn't opened it since, but its presence was a quiet reminder of the girl I'd been, the one who dreamed in charcoal and color. I traced the card's edge, picturing Emma's face, her brown curls, her shy smile. Had she wondered why I hadn't sent anything? Had Lauren told her I'd forgotten? The thought was a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I sank into a chair, my coffee untouched. I'd always believed love could bridge any gap. That if I gave enough money, time, patience, Dan's family would hold me close. But love, I was learning, was a fragile thread, easily snapped when respect was missing. I'd given Dan and Lauren $50,000 for their house in Biltmore Forest, sent $1,200 a month for their mortgage, gone without new shoes or a winter coat, so they could have their granite countertops and private school for the kids. And yet, I was the one left standing outside, listening to my daughter-in-law wish me gone. In the quiet, my mind wandered to Tom, my husband, gone 30 years now. I closed my eyes, imagining him sitting across from me, his calloused hands wrapped around a mug. What do I do? "Tom," I whispered. "I've lost them." In my mind, he didn't answer, but his eyes, warm as the Blue Ridge Mountains, seemed to say, "You haven't lost yourself." "Maggie." I wanted to believe him, but the ache in my chest made it hard. That night, I dreamed of my garden, the daisies withered and grey, their stems crumbling under my touch. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, the darkness of my bedroom pressing close. The dream felt like a warning, a fear that if I let go of Dan's family, I'd lose everything: Emma's laughter, Noah's curious questions, the hope of being part of their lives. But another voice, small but growing, whispered back, "What kind of life is it, if you're only wanted for what you give?" The next afternoon, I walked to the River Arts District, a part of Asheville I'd always loved but rarely visited. The streets were alive with color murals splashed across brick walls, galleries spilling light onto the sidewalk. Artists stood at easels, their hands moving with a freedom I envied. I paused outside a studio, watching a woman paint a mountain scene, her brushstrokes bold and sure. The canvas seemed to hum with life, and for a moment, I remembered the weight of a pencil in my hand, the way it felt to create something from nothing. I turned away, the ache in my chest sharper now. Could I find that part of myself again? Or was it buried too deep as I walked home? The mountains loomed in the distance, their ridges softened by spring haze. Asheville had changed since my youth, grown busier, brighter. But those mountains were constant, a reminder of the girl who'd once dreamed of painting them. I passed a coffee shop, its windows steamed with the promise of warmth, and thought of Clara, my high school art teacher, who'd believed in me. "Don't let the world steal your gift. Maggie," she'd said. I'd let it slip away anyway, but maybe it wasn't too late to reclaim it. Back home, I was pulling weeds in the garden when I heard the squeak of bicycle brakes. I looked up to see Emma, her cheeks flushed, her bike wobbling to a stop on my lawn. My heart leapt. "Emma, sweetheart," I called, brushing dirt from my hands. I hurried to her, pulling her into a hug. She smelled of sunshine and bubble gum, and for a moment, the world felt right again. "Grandma," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I rode all the way from home. I stepped back, studying her face. "Does your daddy know you're here?" I asked, worry creeping in. Their house in Biltmore Forest was a good 3 miles away, too far for an 11-year-old to ride alone. She shook her head, her curls bouncing. I snuck out. "Mom and Dad are fighting again, about money, and about you." My stomach twisted. "Come inside, honey," I said, guiding her to the kitchen. I set about making hot chocolate, the kind with extra marshmallows, even though the May air was warm. Some moments called for comfort, no matter the season. As the milk heated, I glanced at Emma, perched on a stool, her sneakers swinging. "What did you hear?" "Sweetheart," I asked gently. She fiddled with a spoon, her eyes downcast. "Mom said you stopped helping with the house, and now we might lose it. Dad said it's not fair to blame you, but Mom got mad." She looked up, her brown eyes wide with worry. "Why don't you come over anymore?" "Grandma Mom says you're too busy, but I don't believe her." The words hit like a punch. I turned off the stove, giving myself a moment to steady my voice. "I'm never too busy for you." "Emma," I said, setting a mug in front of her. "Or for Noah. I've missed you both so much." She sipped her cocoa, marshmallows bobbing on the surface. "I miss you, too. Noah keeps asking when we'll bake cookies again. He says yours are better than Mom's." I smiled, though my heart ached. "We'll bake soon, I promise." I sat across from her, searching for the right words. "How do you explain adult hurts to a child? Your mom and I..." "We're having a disagreement, honey. It's not about you or Noah, it's about how we treat each other." Emma nodded, but her frown deepened. "Is it because Mom's mean? Sometimes I heard her tell Aunt Sarah you're always in our business." I nearly choked on my tea. "Out of the mouths of babes. It's complicated," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I want you to know none of this is your fault. I love you and that will never change." She reached across the table, her small hand covering mine. "I love you, too, Grandma." Her touch was a lifeline, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard to hold this family together. But it also sharpened the question I'd been avoiding. Could I keep loving them if it meant losing myself? I called Dan to let him know Emma was safe. His relief was palpable, but his voice was strained. "I'll come get her right away," he said. "Let her stay for dinner," I suggested, glancing at Emma, who was now flipping through my sketchbook, her eyes bright with curiosity. "I'll bring her home after." A pause. "Lauren won't like that," Dan said, his tone heavy. "She doesn't have to know," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. Emma came to me. "Dan, she's worried about you two fighting all the time." Another pause. Longer this time. "Fine," he said finally. "But I'll pick her up. I need to talk to you anyway." After we hung up, I watched Emma trace a sketch of the mountains, her finger following the lines I'd drawn decades ago. "Did you make this?" "Grandma," she asked, her voice full of wonder. "I did," I said, my throat tight. "A long time ago." "It's beautiful," she said, and something in me stirred, a spark I thought had gone out. I wanted to be the woman Emma saw, not the one Lauren mocked, not the one Dan took for granted. But wanting wasn't enough. I had to choose it, every day, even when it hurt. We spent the afternoon in the garden, Emma helping me deadhead the daisies, her chatter filling the air with light. She told me about school, about Noah's late-to-science project, about a stray cat she'd named Whiskers. I listened, storing each word like a treasure. When we went inside, I showed her how to make my oatmeal cookies, the kitchen warm with the scent of butter and sugar. For those hours, I felt like a grandmother again, not a stranger in my own family. But as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the garden, I felt the weight of Dan's impending visit. What would he say? Would he defend Lauren? Ask me to write another check? Pretend nothing had changed? I looked at Emma, her hands dusted with flour, and knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I'd walked on a fragile thread for too long, balancing love and loss. Now, I had to decide whether to keep walking, to step off into something new. I stood at the sink, washing dishes, the water warm against my hands. Outside, the daisies glowed in the twilight, their petals catching the last of the light. They were survivors, blooming through drought and frost. Maybe I could be too. Not for Dan, not for Lauren, but for Emma, for Noah, for the woman I was still becoming. The air in my West Asheville bungalow felt thick with anticipation, like the stillness before a summer storm. It was a week after Emma's surprise visit, and the memory of her small hand in mine lingered, a fragile thread of hope amidst the unraveling of my family. The daisies in the kitchen vase had wilted completely now, their petals scattered on the table like fallen stars. I hadn't replaced them, not yet. At 62, Maggie Thompson, was learning that some things had to fade before new growth could begin. I stood at the sink, washing the last of the dishes from Emma's visit, the scent of oatmeal cookies still faint in the air. Dan had picked her up that evening, his face drawn, his words clipped. "We need to talk. Mom," he'd said, but he hadn't stayed. I'd nodded, sensing the weight of what was coming. Lauren's silence since Mother's Day was louder than any argument, and the cancelled mortgage payment, $1,200, I'd torn up in a moment of defiance, hung between us like a storm cloud. I'd spent years giving everything to Dan's family, from the $50,000 down payment on their Biltmore Forest Colonial to the monthly checks that drained my retirement fund. But Lauren's words, overheard through that open-window nosy old woman, nursing home, had shattered the illusion that my sacrifices were valued. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, pulling me from my thoughts. I dried my hands on my daisy-patterned apron, my heart thudding. It was late afternoon, the May light slanting through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I smoothed my cardigan, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Dan stood on the porch, his shoulders hunched, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Behind him, to my surprise, was Lauren, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of barely concealed irritation. Her blonde hair was pulled back tightly, her designer blazer crisp despite the warmth of the day. The sight of her sent a chill through me, but I kept my face calm. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled slightly as I closed the door behind them. Dan walked into the living room, his hands jammed in his pockets, a gesture so like his father's it ached to see. Lauren followed, her heels clicking on the floor, her gaze sweeping the room as if measuring its worth. The space felt smaller with them in it, the photos of Dan and the grandkids on the wall suddenly too personal, too exposed. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, reaching for normalcy, though nothing about this moment felt normal. "I'm not here for coffee." "Mom," Dan said, his voice flat. He perched on the edge of the armchair, his eyes fixed on the floor. Lauren remained standing, her posture rigid, a general ready for battle. I sat on the sofa, folding my hands in my lap. "Then why are you here?" "Dan," I asked, my tone gentle but firm. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit. "The bank called yesterday. The mortgage payment's past due. They're talking foreclosure if we miss another one." I nodded, unsurprised. I'd known this was coming, had braced for it since I tore up that check. "I told you my decision," I said quietly. "I'm not paying anymore." Lauren let out a sharp laugh, the sound like glass breaking. This is ridiculous, Maggie. You're throwing a tantrum because of some silly misunderstanding about Mother's Day. I met her eyes, her gaze cold and unyielding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Lauren, I heard you. I heard what you think of me. Her lips tightened, but she didn't flinch. So you were spying on us, eavesdropping outside my house. I came to leave a gift. I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. A scarf I saved for months to buy, because I thought it might mean something to you. But you were loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Lauren, you said the best Mother's Day gift would be me in a nursing home. Dan's head snapped up, his face paling. What Lauren's expression flickered, a crack in her armor, but she recovered quickly. I was upset, she said, waving a hand dismissively. It was a figure of speech. You're blowing this out of proportion. A figure of speech, I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. You've made it clear for years how little you value me. The forgotten invitations, the snide comments, the way you've kept me from Emma and Noah. And all the while, I've been paying your mortgage, giving up my own security so you could have your perfect house. Dan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. Mom, Lauren's been under a lot of stress. She didn't mean it. Didn't mean it. I turned to him, the hurt spilling over. Dan, I found Emma's birthday card in the mail, marked wrong address. When you know I've lived here for decades, I've sent cards, gifts, notes of love, and they've all been returned or hidden. Your wife has made sure I'm a stranger to my own grandchildren. Dan's face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw the boy he'd been, the one who'd clung to me after Tom's death. I didn't know about the cards, he said, his voice breaking. I swear, Mom. Lauren rolled her eyes. Oh, please, don't play the victim. Maggie, you've always been so dramatic, acting like we owe you because you helped with the house. Something in me snapped, not with anger, but with clarity. I stood, my hands no longer trembling. I don't want you to owe me. Lauren, I want you to respect me. I gave you $50,000 for that house, paid your mortgage for 18 months, went without so you could have more, and in return, you've treated me like a burden, someone to tolerate until you can ship me off. Lauren's facade cracked, her voice rising. Tolerate you. Do you know how exhausting it is, having you hover around, always needing attention? Dan was fine, until you started with your guilt trips, your poor widow act. Lauren, that's enough, Dan said, standing abruptly, the coffee table rattling. His face was flushed, his eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in years, anger. Not at me, but at her. No, it's not enough, she shot back, turning on him. Your mother's been manipulating you for years, waving her checkbook to keep you under her thumb. Well, we don't need her. She paused, her chest heaving, then added, we just need her money right now. The room went still, the truth laid bare. Dan stared at her, his mouth open, as if seeing her for the first time. I felt a strange calm wash over me, like the quiet after a long cry. Thank you for your honesty, I said, my voice steady. At least now we all know where we stand. Lauren's eyes narrowed, but she didn't back down. You think you're so noble, Maggie, but you're just a lonely old woman buying our attention. Without your money, you're nothing to us. Dan took a step toward her, his voice low and raw. Stop it, Lauren. You don't get to talk to her like that. Why not? She snapped, turning on him. She's the one holding our house hostage because her feelings got hurt. Do you think Emma and Noah will thank her when we're homeless? I held up a hand, cutting through the tension. This isn't about punishment. Lauren, it's about respect. I've spent my life putting Dan first, giving up my dreams, my savings, my comfort, so he could have a better life. I'm 62, with barely enough left for my own future, because I gave it all to you. And in return, you've made it clear I'm nothing but a checkbook. Dan sank back into the armchair, running a hand over his face. Mom, I didn't see it. I thought Lauren would come around. You thought wrong. I said, softer now, but firm. And you let it happen. Dan, you let her push me out. Let her tell Emma I don't care about her. I can't keep doing this, not for you, not for anyone. Lauren grabbed her purse, her movements sharp. Fine, if that's how you want it, we're done here. Come on, Dan. He didn't move. His eyes met mine, and I saw something new regret, raw and unguarded. I found the cards, he said quietly, almost to himself, in Lauren's desk. When I was looking for the mortgage papers, there were dozens, Mom, birthday cards, Christmas cards, all unopened. She said she was protecting the kids from you. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the room. Lauren froze, her hand on the door. That's not, she started, but Dan cut her off. Don't, he said, his voice hard. Don't lie about this. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. I spoke to a lawyer last week. I said, my voice calm despite the storm inside. The $50,000 I gave for your house, the 18 months of mortgage payments that gives me a financial interest in the property. I could make a claim on any sale proceeds, or I could invest more to stop the foreclosure. But as a co-owner, with my name on the deed, Dan's eyes widened. You're suing us, no, I said, shaking my head. But I needed to know where I stood. If I help, it'll be on my terms. I want respect. Dan, I want to see Emma and Noah without sneaking around. And I want an apology from Lauren, not for show, but one that means something. Lauren laughed. A bitter sound. An apology I'd rather live in a cardboard box than grovel to you. Then we're at an impasse, I said, rising to open the door. Because I won't compromise on my dignity anymore, not even for you. Dan, Lauren stormed out, her heels echoing on the porch. Dan hesitated, torn between us. Mom, he began, but I held up a hand. I've heard enough, I said. You both need to go. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, then nodded once. I didn't know about the cards, he said again, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Whether I believed him didn't matter right now. When the door closed behind them, I sank onto the sofa, trembling not with sadness, but with a fierce, unexpected pride. I'd stood my ground, something I hadn't done in years. The room was quiet, the photos on the wall watching me like old friends. I touched a frame, Dan at 7, holding a daisy he'd picked for me. I loved him, always would. But love without respect was a fire that burned too hot, leaving only ashes. Outside, the garden glowed in the evening light, the daisies catching the last rays of sun. I walked to the window, pressing my hand against the glass. I'd been a tree bending in the wind for too long, giving shade to those who didn't value it. Now, I'd stand tall, roots deep, branches reaching for my own sky. The cost was high, but I was ready to pay it. The Price of Dignity, Part 5, Painting a New Path. The weeks following that stormy confrontation in my living room passed like a dream, soft-edged and strange. My West Asheville bungalow, once heavy with silence, began to hum with small signs of life. The daisies I'd neglected were gone, replaced by a fresh bouquet of lavender from my garden, their scent a quiet promise of renewal. At 62, I, Maggie Thompson, was learning that healing wasn't a straight line, but a winding path, one I was finally ready to walk. Lauren's cruel words, nosy old woman, nursing home still echoed in quiet moments, but they no longer defined me. I'd stood my ground, torn up that $1,200 mortgage check, and faced the truth about my place in Dan's family. Now, it was time to find my own. I started small, the way you do when you're piecing yourself back together. One morning, I opened the old sketchbook I'd left on the kitchen table. Its pages yellowed but full of possibility. The sketches mountains, Tom's hands. Dan as a boy felt like letters from a younger me, one who'd believed in beauty. I traced a drawing of the Blue Ridge Mountains, my fingers hesitant, as if afraid to wake a sleeping part of myself. Could I still create, or had the years of sacrifice buried that gift too deep on impulse? I drove to an art supply store in the River Arts District, a vibrant corner of Asheville where creativity spilled onto every sidewalk. The shop smelled of paint and possibility, its shelves crowded with brushes, canvases, and tubes of color. The owner, a woman about my age with silver hair and paint-flecked hands, smiled as I hesitated over a set of watercolors. "Getting back into it?" she asked, her voice kind. "After 40 years." I admitted, clutching the paints like a lifeline. "I don't know if I still can." She handed me the bag, her eyes crinkling. "It's like riding a bike, honey. The heart remembers, back home." I set up a small easel by the living room window, overlooking my garden. My first strokes were clumsy, the colors bleeding into each other like my emotions. I painted the lavender, their purple spikes soft against the green. But the result was messy, childlike. I laughed, a sound that surprised me, and kept going. Each brushstroke felt like a step, tentative but forward. I wasn't the girl who'd dreamed of art school anymore, but maybe I could be something new. A flyer on the art shop's bulletin board led me to a watercolor class at the River Arts District, held in an airy studio with exposed brick walls and skylights. The instructor, Ellis, was a gentle man in his 70s, with kind eyes and a patience that put me at ease. My classmates were a mix of ages, but I gravitated toward Clara, a retired librarian with a quick laugh and a knack for bold colors. I started painting after my husband passed. She told me over coffee after our first class. It's how I found my way back to myself. Clara's words stayed with me. A beacon in the fog. I'd lost so much Tom. My dreams, my place in Dan's family, but I hadn't lost everything. The class became my anchor. 3 evenings a week, filled with the soft scratch of brushes and Ellis's quiet encouragement. "You've got a natural sense of composition, Maggie," he said one night, peering at my painting of a sunset over the mountains. I blushed, unused to praise, but felt a spark of pride. I'd done this before, long ago, and maybe I could do it again. Clara invited me to join her and her friends for coffee at a cozy shop off Haywood Street, a place with mismatched chairs and the rich aroma of roasted beans. Judith, Eleanor, and Doris welcomed me like an old friend, drawing me into their talk of books, grandkids, and the upcoming art fair at Biltmore Village. "You should submit something," Judith said, her eyes bright. "The deadline's in a month." "Oh, I couldn't," I protested, stirring my coffee. "I'm just starting again." "We're all starting again at something," Eleanor said wisely, her silver bracelets jangling. "That's the gift of our age reinvention." Reinvention. The word lingered as I drove home. The mountains, glowing under a pink sky. I'd spent decades as a mother, a widow, a grandmother, always defined by what I gave others. Now, I was becoming Maggie again, a woman with dreams of her own. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. One Saturday, my doorbell rang and I opened it to find Dan, alone, his face softer than it had been in weeks. Emma and Noah stood behind him, their faces lighting up. Grandma Emma cried, throwing her arms around me. Noah, 9 and shyer, hugged me too, his head barely reaching my shoulder. "What's this?" I asked, my heart swelling as I ushered them inside. "I thought the kids could spend the day," Dan said, his voice tentative. "If that's okay." I looked at him, searching for the boy I'd raised. "It's more than okay," I said, and meant it. We spent the morning in the kitchen, baking oatmeal cookies, the kids' laughter filling the house like music. Emma helped me measure flour, her curls dusted with sugar, while Noah told me about his science project, a model volcano he was building for school. "Can you help me paint it?" "Grandma," he asked, his eyes bright. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, ruffling his hair. I glanced at Dan, who sat at the table, watching us with a mix of relief and regret. He'd been quiet since arriving, but I sensed a shift, a crack in the wall he'd built between us. After lunch, we moved to the garden, where Emma and I deadheaded the lavender, her small hands careful but eager. Noah sprawled on the grass, sketching his volcano with colored pencils I'd given him. Dan joined us, pulling weeds, his movements slow, deliberate. "This place hasn't changed," he said, glancing at the daisies I'd replanted. "I remember planting those with you when I was a kid. You were so proud," I said, smiling at the memory. "You said they were for me, to make me happy." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I haven't done much of that lately." "Have I?" I paused, a lavender stem in my hand. "You're here now." "Dan, that's a start." He nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. When the kids ran off to chase a butterfly, he spoke again, his voice low. "Lauren and we're not doing great. She's furious about the house, about the money. I told her about the cards, the ones she hid. She said she was protecting the kids, but I don't buy it." I sat back on my heels, the earth cool beneath me. "What do you believe?" Dan, he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Tom's it hurt. "I believe I let you down. I let her push you away, and I didn't see it. I'm sorry, Mom." The words were a balm, but not a cure. "I know you are," I said softly. "But sorry isn't enough. I need you to stand up for me, for us. I need you to choose respect, not just when it's easy." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I'm trying. I moved out last week. To a motel near work. I needed space to think. The kids are with Lauren, but I see them weekends. I want you to be part of their lives. Mom, no more sneaking around." I reached for his hand, squeezing it. "That's all I've ever wanted, Dan. But it has to be real." He stayed for dinner, a simple meal of chicken casserole and salad, the kids' chatter, a warm blanket over the table. When they left, Emma hugged me tight, whispering, "I love you, Grandma." Noah slipped me a drawing of his volcano, a lopsided but earnest gift. I held it close, my heart full, alone again. I walked to my easel, the sunset painting half finished. I dipped my brush in crimson, adding depth to the sky. The strokes were surer now, guided by a quiet confidence. I thought of Clara, of her words about finding herself through art. I was doing the same, one color at a time. A month later, I submitted a painting to the Biltmore Village Art Fair, a watercolor of my garden at dusk, the lavender glowing under a soft sky. To my shock, it was accepted, displayed in a small gallery alongside works by local artists. Clara and her friends came to the opening, their laughter filling the space. "You're a natural, Maggie," Clara said, raising a glass of sparkling cider. "This is just the beginning." I stood before my painting, the crowd a gentle hum around me. The garden in the canvas was more than flowers. It was me, rooted and reaching, battered but blooming. I'd lost so much Tom, my savings, my illusions about Dan's family, but I'd gained something, too. A life that was mine, not defined by what I gave, but by who I was. That night, I sat in my garden, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands. The stars were bright above Asheville, a canvas of their own. I thought of Emma and Noah, of Dan's halting steps toward amends, of the friends who'd welcomed me into their circle. Healing wasn't finished, maybe never would be, but I was on my way. The price of dignity had been high, but as I looked at the lavender swaying in the breeze, I knew it was worth every penny. The morning sun poured into my West Asheville kitchen, painting the walls with a golden glow that felt like a blessing. I stood at the counter, arranging a bouquet of tulips from my garden, their red and yellow petals vibrant against the chipped ceramic vase I'd always loved. The air smelled of cinnamon and sugar. A tray of homemade rolls rising in the oven, a recipe I'd perfected over the winter. It was Mother's Day again, a year since that shattering moment when Lauren's words had stripped away my illusions. At 62, I, Maggie Thompson, had walked a long road since then, one of pain and pride, loss and rediscovery. Today, my heart was full, not with the weight of sacrifice, but with the lightness of a life reclaimed. The doorbell chimed, a cheerful sound that made me smile. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Grandma Emma cried, her 12-year-old arms wrapping around me like a lifeline. Noah, 10 now and growing fast, followed, his grin shy but bright. Behind them stood Dan, my son, holding a wrapped package, his face softer than I'd seen in years. "Happy Mother's Day." "Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Something smells amazing. Cinnamon rolls." I told him, taking the package, "Your favorite, if I remember right." Emma tugged at my hand, her curls bouncing. "Grandma, wait till you see the painting I made at school. Dad brought it for you. I can't wait." "Sweetheart," I said, my heart swelling. We moved to the living room, brighter now with my own watercolor landscapes on the walls, each one a step in my journey back to myself. Emma flopped onto the sofa, pulling out a rolled-up canvas from her backpack. Noah climbed beside her, chattering about his latest science project, a solar-powered car he'd built for a school fair. Dan settled into the armchair, watching us with a quiet pride I hadn't seen in him before. So much had changed in a year. Dan and Lauren's colonial in Biltmore Forest had gone into foreclosure, the bank claiming it after missed payments piled up. My lawyer had assured me I could pursue a claim, given the $50,000 I'd contributed to the down payment and 18 months of mortgage checks. But I chose not to. Some battles weren't worth winning, not if the cost was more bitterness. Dan and Lauren separated 2 months after our confrontation. The strain of financial ruin and exposed lies, too much for their marriage. Lauren moved to California with Emma and Noah. A decision that had pierced my heart like a physical pain. For months, I'd lived in fear of losing them forever. Their voices faint over weekly phone calls. Their absence a void I couldn't fill. But life, I'd learned, had a way of surprising you. 6 months ago, Lauren announced she'd met someone new, a man with kids of his own. She wanted to stay in California permanently, but was willing to let Emma and Noah spend summers and holidays with Dan. Dan had been devastated, both by the end of his marriage and the prospect of part-time fatherhood, but he'd found a resilience I hadn't expected. "Mom," he'd called me one night, his voice steady. "I'm going to ask for full custody. The kids miss home, their friends, their school. They miss you." I'd held my breath, hardly daring to hope. "Are you sure?" "Dan, I'm sure," he'd said. "Lauren's not a bad mother, but her life's moving in a different direction. The kids need stability, and I can give them that." To everyone's surprise, Lauren hadn't fought him. Her new relationship was all-consuming, and her partner's children filled the role she'd once played. 3 months ago, Emma and Noah returned to Asheville, moving into a modest rental house Dan found near my bungalow. Suddenly, I was back in their lives not as a checkbook, but as a grandmother who picked them up from school, taught Emma to sketch, and helped Noah with his science experiments. Their laughter filled my home again. A music I'd almost forgotten. I unwrapped Dan's gift, my fingers careful with the paper. Inside was a framed photograph, taken at the Biltmore Village Art Fair last month, where one of my watercolors had won an honorable mention. In the photo, Emma and Noah pressed against me, their arms around my waist, all of us beaming at the camera. My painting hung in the background, a sunset over my garden, its colors warm and alive. "It's perfect," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. Dan helped me hang it above the fireplace, the frame catching the morning light. "It belongs here," he said, stepping back to admire it. The kids ran outside to the garden, their voices carrying through the open window. I watched them chase each other among the tulips, their joy a balm to old wounds. "I got the promotion," Dan said casually as he sliced strawberries for our lunch salad. "Started last week." "Dan, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, pausing with a cinnamon roll in hand. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He shrugged, but I saw the pride in his stance. Wanted to save some good news for today. "I'm so proud of you," I said, and meant it. Dan had found steady work at a smaller tech company, a step down from his old job, but reliable. He'd grown in ways I hadn't expected, taking on parenting with a focus I hadn't seen before, teaching Emma and Noah responsibility, apologizing when he fell short. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly, meeting my eyes. "Not just the money you gave us, but you showed me what strength looks like. Mom, what it means to respect yourself." I squeezed his arm, too moved to speak. We finished preparing lunch, a quiche, salad, and those cinnamon rolls, a simple meal made rich by the company. Before we ate, Dan raised his glass of sparkling cider. "To Mom," he said, his voice thick, "for teaching us what matters." Emma and Noah echoed the toast, their glasses clinking with enthusiasm. I blinked back tears, raising my own. "To family," I said, and we drank, the moment sweet as the cider. After lunch, the kids helped Dan with the dishes, a new habit he'd instilled. I stepped onto the porch, the spring air soft with promise. My garden was a riot of color tulips, lavender, daisies, each bloom a testament to care and time. Clara would pick me up at 3 for our weekly art group, a circle of women who'd become my lifeline. We'd supported each other through transitions: Clara's retirement, Judith's husband's illness, my own reshaping of family. Their friendship had shown me I wasn't alone. That connection could bloom at any age. My watercolors had grown bolder, more confident. A local gallery in the River Arts District had agreed to display 3 of my paintings in their summer exhibition, a small triumph that filled me with quiet pride. I'd sold one last month, a landscape of the Blue Ridge Mountains, to a couple visiting from Charlotte. The money went toward new paints, but the real reward was knowing my work had touched someone. Inside, I heard Emma's giggle, Dan's off-key humming to a James Taylor song on the radio, the sounds of family, rebuilt on respect, not obligation. Last week, I'd received a letter from Lauren, postmarked from California. It was short. Her handwriting careful, Maggie. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I let my pride and fear get in the way. I'm sorry for the hurt I caused." I'd read it twice, then set it aside. The apology was years late, but I appreciated it more than I'd expected. I had no desire to reconnect, not after everything. But I didn't hold on to anger either. Some bridges were better left as memories. Dan joined me on the porch, handing me a fresh cup of chamomile tea. "Happy?" he asked, his voice simple but searching. I looked at him. My son who'd nearly lost himself but found his way back. He was learning, as I had, that love needed boundaries to thrive. Yes, I answered, truthful, I'm happy. We sat in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun warming our faces, in the garden. Emma and Noah played tag, their laughter drifting like petals on the breeze. Inside, my latest painting waited on the easel, a half-finished view of the mountains at dawn. Tomorrow, I'd add more color, more light. Tomorrow, I'd keep creating the life I wanted. Today, it was enough to be here, present, respected, loved not for what I gave, but for who I was. The price of dignity had been steep. But as I sipped my tea, watching my family bloom like the tulips in my garden, I knew it was worth every moment. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If Maggie's story inspired you, subscribe to my channel for more tales of heart and hope. Comment below with your city. I'd love to see where this story has reached.